I'm a big believer that having a physically demanding activity that you do on a regular basis can have a very positive impact on our creativity and the way that we think and introducing us to new thoughts. So, getting into your life, how has martial arts played a role in refining your creativity over the years?
Uh, that's a good question. So I've been doing martial arts since I was a teenager, like I think around 15, 16. I've been doing it for about 25 years now. Um, and while when I was in school, like I always did pretty well in school, like in grade school, high school, etc. Mostly at the behest of my parents. The below average grades were unacceptable. But it really wasn't until I started practicing martial arts that I really started to figure out how to pursue something um, really passionately and really start to get excited and explore something well beyond anything I had done previously. Like I had played soccer and little sports type stuff here and there, and I was never really growing up. I wasn't really athletic. I was definitely fall in the video game nerd crowd. So martial arts was kind of a big shift for me in doing that. So martial arts kind of came along and kicked me in the ass in one way. And like I said, it helped me to develop like this um, passionate pursuit of something. And when I initially started college, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. When I was in high school, I was like the art kid. I always liked to draw and paint, and I was fairly good at it. Not remarkable, but good enough. And so I figured I would go to school for some kind of art degree, but it was like, well, how am I going to make money at doing this? So initially, I started at a university local to Pittsburgh, and I was doing art education because that seemed like the most logical. Like, oh, I could draw, I could paint, and then I could teach other people how to do it. Um, but the program that I was enrolled in, they had design classes as part of the curriculum that you could take. So I did. I really didn't understand what design was at that point. Like, I think the closest that I had a conception of was, it's making CD covers, album covers, which obviously dates me quite a bit here. And so it was really interesting. I kind of enjoyed it. And then a really close friend of mine was going to Kent State University, which is about hour and a half, 2 hours from here. He also was doing art ed, but he was minoring in design. And so in that first year of his design minor, when he came home and showed me the work he was doing, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. There was something inside of me that made me jump up and down and go like, oh, that's the thing. That's what I'm supposed to do. I find this endlessly interesting it was like black and white layouts of typography and really big letter forms. And yeah, I'm sure most people are like, oh, it sounds like the most fucking boring thing ever. But I got really excited about it. And I also saw the contrast in terms of the work that I was doing and I was seeing other students do at the university I was at and the work that he had accomplished and the sort of the high level of skill comparatively just in, 15 weeks. So I kind of at that point decided like, oh, I got to make a change here. So I went through the spring semester and then, talked it over with my family and I ended up transferring to Kent State the following fall. So that what was kind of interesting about that is like, so martial arts gave me that passionate pursuit of something. And so when I showed up at Kent, I had to, even though I already had 2 years of experience at another university, I had to start the design program at the very beginning. So, math and science credits, all that sort of transferred, but the things specific to the discipline did not. And the way that Kent's program was set up, like you have to take course number one, only offered in the fall. You have to pass it with a certain GPA in order to be allowed and admitted into course number two, only offered in the spring. And the whole program continues pretty lockstep like that through the senior year. So, I had a little bit of an advantage because over the other incoming freshmen because I was 2 years older. And, I think a lot of them didn't know, they were like most freshmen just trying to figure out what they were in for. But for me, I came in and I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. I know that it's a hard program. Like I've elected to do this and I'm going to go all out and I'm going to find out if I'm worthy of this or, if I'm supposed to do something else, but I'm going to leave no there won't be any question about it. Either I'll fail miserably or I'm going to be a success, but I'm not going to take a middle of the road type approach. And so um, I kind of elaborated, but what I wanted to get to was the martial arts gave me the passionate pursuit, and then when I got into design school, that gave me the detail oriented mindset that I needed, and then I brought that back into my martial arts practice, and that has served me very well over the course of my uh, not exactly career, but over the course of my practice in that. And so there's sort of like these two things that are always going back and forth for me in whatever I'm engaged in, regardless of martial arts design, working on my house, etc. Is like being really excited about it, but then also that detail oriented mindset.
I'm also a big believer that being a creative person, and I think we all have some type of creativity within us, it's a very introspective process where there's something deep within us that we need to release into the world. And that introspective process can be filled with a lot of solitude and alone time so that you can first open yourself up to that creativity and then down the line introduce that into the world. I'm curious to know, how was growing up as an only child playing a part in that process for you throughout your life?
I had really thought too much about this. Growing up as an only child, I think that on one hand, I spent a good amount of time by myself. And so, if you're an only child, I think and you don't, I mean, I had friends, but it wasn't like I had, tons of friends and was always out doing something. Um, I tend to lean a little bit more on the introverted side, in particular when I was younger. I've transformed a bit, and kind of been able to adopt some extroverted characteristics as I've had more experience and had to do public speaking, things like that. But certainly, in my grade school years, I was very shy and introverted. And so I did spend a lot of time, by myself. I spent a lot of time, practicing drawing, and I mentioned playing video games quite a bit when I was younger. And then I kind of had a small circle of friends. But I think that I think the fact that I did have some sort of background in the arts, and had some degree of skill, and had gotten some degree of recognition from that it was kind of like it's sort of two things at play. Like, one, I was really interested in it, and then I would get positive feedback from family, teachers, friends, etc. And so then that sort of was the reward necessary to go back to that intrinsic, like, okay, I'm going to practice drawing Sonic the Hedgehog again and again, or X-Men, or any of the things that were really popular through the 80s and 90s. um, that sort of that interplay helped me. And again, like, sort of not really knowingly, it just that's what happened, and then I think it shows up later in life, kind of luckily.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think one of the reasons why I was fascinated to ask you about that is because I'm not an only child, but I have three older siblings who are much older than me. So
Mm,
from sixth grade on, I was the only one in my house. So it kind of
yeah.
felt for like my most formative years in a way. I was kind of an only child, and a lot of the
Mm,
people that I went to school with
yeah.
didn't even know I had siblings. They thought I was an only child. And I think that's definitely an astute point to make, where like you really don't even think about it. It kind of just is. And then it kind of, when you grow up, you see it come to life in certain ways. And I know that, tying it back to your martial arts as well, I know that a book that you enjoy a lot is The Way of the Peaceful Warrior by
Mm.
Dan Millman. I'm curious to know, what's your personal definition of the peaceful warrior, and how do you think you've adopted those values in your life?
Yeah, that is one of my favorite books. I think that it's well, I'm a firm believer in the quote, which I will butcher, and I can't properly attribute, but it's I see it all over the place these days. But it's better to be a warrior in the garden rather than a gardener in the war. And so I think that you you can't be. Um, I think that part of it is you can't tell if you're a good person if you're not capable, if you're just weak, because you don't really have any options. Like, if you don't have the ability to be violent and to be aggressive, then you don't really know if you have that monster under control, right? But it's like, if you've taken the time to involve yourself in some form of practiced violence, and to practice that, and to know what it's like to, you fight or you spar with somebody, and to know how to separate the aggression from just the activity. And so there's a martial arts saying that my teacher has often repeated, which is, when your anger goes forth, withhold your sword. When your sword goes forth, withhold your anger. And so, being able to have that, lifetime of experience doing martial arts, getting hit by people and, friends and so forth, and people that aren't friends necessarily, people you just, have met at maybe like a tournament or visiting another school or something like that. It helps you to keep yourself, to, not like just jump to that angry part. Like somebody hits you, maybe it's an accident, maybe it's not, but it's like, okay, you can just have that separated. And so, that in a very visceral experience is important, because then, if you get in a really heated argument with somebody, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's somebody you don't know, it makes it much easier to keep your calm, to be collective, and like, okay, it's like there's no, maybe I feel that anger inside of me, but there's no need for me to like lash out at the person, either verbally or physically. It kind of helps to keep everything in control. You've developed yourself in the service of yourself and the community, and so that puts you in a particular healthy place, I think.
Diving into that a little bit deeper and tying it into your professional life now. So, after you graduate from Kent State undergrad, you had a job lined up at the end of 2008, 2009 in a Pittsburgh studio, but that got rescinded due to the financial crash. What was the initial reaction like that when that first happened?
Oh, that whole period of my life was really difficult, because I had gone through this program at the university. I'd worked really hard. I graduated in the top like 10% of my class, and got various awards. And I had interned with this studio previously, and it was like one of the best in the area. And it was kind of unheard of for them to, at that time, to like pick somebody up right out of school. And so I had completed my internship, and they were like, hey, there's a job waiting for you here if you want it whenever you're done. And that was just like thrilling. Like, okay, I just got to get through this last year of school. And then the crash happened, and it was like, hey, sorry. It was like, nothing you did, just circumstances. Like, we got to sort of pull our resources back and make sure that we can continue to, pay for our employees and, the people that we've already committed to. So, I mean, I understood it from a purely practical sense, but, at the time, like that happened, and the girl I had been dating for a long time, we broke it off, and she was somebody at that time that I thought that I was going to probably marry. And so it's like all of these things that I had sort of worked really hard at and built up, like sort of collapsed all in about a period of like 6-9 months. And so that was pretty difficult. I went back to, I got a job waiting tables, which again, sort of like the ego kill of that was like, I'm supposed to, I'm doing the exact same thing I was doing when I was in high school. Like, this sucks. What did I do all that work for? Like, all of those questions came up, and it was pretty challenging. And so after that, I mean, I did that for a couple months, and I was waiting tables at a lodge, like in the woods, about 2 hours from where I grew up. And so I would basically stay in one of the hotel rooms at the lodge a couple days a week, and I would work like 4 or 5 days in a row, get up at like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and then like run the breakfast shift, go until noon, get a nap, and then run the dinner shift as well. And then as people came to stay, like I was basically living out of a suitcase, so I would just like move my suitcase room to room. So it was even destabilizing in the sense of like I don't even have like a permanent place to live. I mean, I could always go back to my parents' house. Not like I was formally homeless. I was just selectively homeless. But that was, all of that was kind of difficult to take in at that particular point in my life. And so a couple months later, along came an offer to be an in-house freelancer at a creative agency in Cleveland, and I like took that without question, I like ran for it. I was like, okay, get me the hell out of here. I kind of don't care what the job is. I just don't want to, I want to do something in the profession. I just don't want to like wait tables for minimum wage. Um, so I took that job, and again, since it was a freelance job, and it wasn't like it was like a it was a it wasn't for a particular project. It was like for a particular length of time that I would be working in house, and that was like 3 or 4 months. I don't specifically recall. I didn't want to get a place to live because I wasn't sure. Like, okay, this runs 3 months and then it ends. Then I'm going to be stuck with a lease and I'm not going to have a job. So basically, what I ended up doing, I was pretty used to living out of a suitcase. So I still had a bunch of friends that were at Kent State. And so I would go and stay with a friend for a week in their apartment, in their dorm, whatever. I would sleep on the floor. I would sleep on the couch. I would air mattress, whatever it was. And, I'd go to Cleveland during the week. I would work, come back, shower, whatever. And then on weekends, I would take all of my stuff back to Pittsburgh, drive the 2.5 hours, go to my parents' house, do my laundry, spend Friday night, Saturday night there. And then either late Sunday night or very early Monday morning, I'd drive back and go back to work and have another friend to stay with. And a couple of the friends let me stay for 2 weeks at a time. So that was nice. But it was that had its own set of challenges, obviously as well. Like you spend that much time living out of a suitcase, traveling back and forth everywhere. It does kind of wear on you. But I was happy to be doing, professional creative work. So I was thrilled about that.
What path do you think life would have taken you down if that Pittsburgh job never got rescinded?
Oh man, I would have never, I wouldn't have gone to graduate school. I wouldn't have started GFDA. I think I'm pretty sure that I would have gotten comfortable enough with that, that I wouldn't have scratched the entrepreneurial itch that kind of welled up inside of me. I think I would have been like, there would have been something in the back of my mind. I don't know if I would have had um, the gumption to go ahead and pursue it. Um, but I think that I would have been like, yeah, like this is good. It's like it doesn't get much better than this. It's like one of the best agencies. There's great work, and I just probably would have worked my way up the standard ladder, and I'm sure it would have been a good life, but it would have been a bit more standard issue, I think.
Do you think that would have been fulfilling for you, or would it kind of just be like, this is what I do?
I think that, I mean, who the hell really knows? But I think that I would have found fulfillment elsewhere. I don't think it would have made me dead inside. Uh, I think that would have been really rewarding, and like when I was in my 20s and starting design, like there were a bunch of things that I wanted. I wanted to do like really good work with really cool clients, and get cool portfolio pieces and win awards, and like it in some to some extent through the choices that I made, like I got to do all of those things, and I got to do them all. I get to be have some degree of success at that fairly early, and I found in being able to accomplish those goals that like they were really great thrills in the moment, but they were ultimately kind of meaningless in the long run. It was just kind of like, oh, okay, so like I got an award in print magazine, which was like the pinnacle of when you were a student. Like, oh my God, maybe one day in 15 or 20 years I'll have that. But that sort of came and went, and it was like, oh, my life didn't change. I'm still Brian. Still have all the same problems. Still have all the same family and friends that you know I had before, and it wasn't like all of a sudden all of these clients came knocking or anything like that. It was just kind of like, I appreciate it for what it is. It's certainly not nothing, but it wasn't the fulfillment that I thought that so many of those things would have brought. And so, kind of getting back to your question, I think that had I pursued a more standard path, I would have also, maybe it would have taken longer or who knows, but I would have met those goals at some point, and hopefully it would have come to those similar realizations, and then sought the other things in my life, for fulfillment.
Yeah, so you mentioned you would have never gone to grad school if you had gotten that job. So walk me through, you end up going back to Kent State for grad school, and it's there where GFDA is born. Just walk me through that entire process of how that started.
Yeah, sure. So after I finished that, I'll make a very long story. I'll sort of condense it for you. But after I finished that freelance job, I applied to be a part-time instructor at Kent because I was living there. And right before that first semester started, right before I was actually supposed to have my interview with the director, my dad had a stroke. And so I was literally like, I had been in Pittsburgh. I had just driven home, or I had just driven back to Kent from Pittsburgh, pulled in the driveway, was getting my stuff out of the car. And my mom called me. She's like, "I'm headed to the hospital with your dad. I think he's had a stroke. Like, you need to come home." So, like, take all the stuff that I just unpacked from my car, turned around and drove back, which was like the longest car ride in my life. This would have been like 2000, probably 2009. And ultimately he ended up being okay. That she got him to the hospital. My parents lived pretty close to a hospital, so with plenty of time to be treated, and there was some complications immediately afterwards, but medicine's pretty good, so they were able to take pretty good care of him. So, anyways, eventually, so that was like a very hectic, unknown, chaotic like week when that all happened. And then he was in the hospital for, I don't remember, longer than that, and then rehab and all of those things. But then I went back and I had my interview proper with the director. And since I had been a student there, it was largely like, it was kind of an informal interview. It was like, okay, what classes I'm going to have you teach? And, they set me up with, like most first time teachers, like, okay, you're going to teach Photoshop and the Adobe Suite, because we don't know if you're a good teacher or not. And if you fuck up teaching students software, like, they'll recover. It's not as bad as foundational principles of design that they'll carry with them for the rest of their life. Um, so I did that. And so that first year I was back at Kent teaching part-time. I would like go back to Pittsburgh on the weekends and help my mom take care of my dad, help him get rehabilitated. And then I was teaching classes, like two classes. I was teaching two classes that semester, and they were kind of, I think, like Tuesday, Thursday. So I teach in the morning, in the afternoon, or evening, whatever it was. And then Friday, I'd go back. Friday through Monday, I'd be in Pittsburgh, and then I'd be in Kent those other couple days. So I was kind of balancing those two things for a bit. And when I got to the end of that spring semester, the director pulled me aside and said, "Hey, like, you get really good reviews teaching. It seems like this is something you like. If this is something you want to do, if you want to do it professionally, full time, and not sort of the adjunct thing that you're doing, then you're going to have a master's degree. So, you should consider, if that's something you want, you should consider applying." So that was kind of how that kicked off. Ironically, that I applied, and of course I got in. But the same week that I received my letter of acceptance, I also received a phone call from that same agency saying, like, "Hey, we're ready to hire if you're available." So it was real interesting, like, God intervention, universe, something. It's like, all right, like, here's your two paths. Like, it's time to pick deliberately about this, as opposed to just kind of going where the wind blows. And so and it was interesting because I remember very specifically standing in the graduate studio. My colleague and eventual business partner, Jason Bacher, we had started to kind of become friends then. He was already in the graduate program. He went right from undergrad into the grad program, and I had the year off, but then I was teaching there, so that we kind of ended up in the program at the same time because of that. And I remember, like, I would go and hang out in the grad studio with the grad students, and I remember standing there, like, really contemplating this, like, what are my options in my life right now? And there was like this really clear, I don't want to say it's a clear voice, like something spoke in my head specifically, but it was like this very clear and deliberate feeling, like, if you choose to go do this job, you're going to miss something with this person. That, like, I'm like standing there looking at as he's like fumbling through papers or whatever on his desk. And it was so funny because it just seemed so ridiculous at the time. I was like, that was weird. And then, then I think about everything that happened afterwards, and it's like, oh yeah, that there was an intuition there that I'm glad I listened to. Perhaps that thing that I developed in childhood, uh, it suddenly rose to the surface and made a declaration. Um, so I did. I chose graduate school. That was in the spring, and then in the fall, he and I were both teaching classes together. Not together like simultaneously, even though that did eventually happen, but we were both teaching classes separately. And so then in the morning, after, because if you're a graduate student, they don't give you the prime like 11, 3 o'clock studio classes. You get the 7 a.m. where nobody wants to be, faculty, students, all of the above. Nobody wants to be there at 7 a.m. So he and I both had 7 a.m. classes, and we would go get coffee after we were done. And we, on this particular day, we went off campus to the Starbucks, and we were just joking about how none of our students pay attention to us, and how clearly that must be the fault of the students and not us as brilliant educators. Uh, and then in that walk back from having our coffee, we were like, oh, what if we made a website that had profane design advice? Maybe we could get our students' attention that way, and not in an entirely serious manner. We were just kind of spitballing ideas, and then we got back to the studio, and it was kind of an afternoon of calling each other's bluff, like, oh, I'll write some copy. Oh, you start designing, I'll start coding. And we kind of bounced off of each other for a few hours. And then we had the first iteration of the site and set it out and like launched it, with zero expectations. No, I want to make business out of this. I want to make a name from this or anything like that. It just was two guys working towards burnout in graduate school that like thought something was funny, like a couple of 10-year-olds, and we just said, fuck it, let's run with it.
70,000 people visited that website by the
Mm-hmm.
third day of launching.
Yeah.
What do you think the main contribution to such instant growth was?
I think that social media algorithms weren't as sophisticated as they are now. And so there was a lot more of a natural chance for something to go viral. Um, but I think that it was just it's not like we were the first website to use profanity as part of it. Like, I think, what the fuck should I make for dinner and other similar websites were there. And, we kind of like fashioned the idea a little bit off of that. But nobody had done it for design or the creative industry or anything like that. And so, when we initially launched the website, we had like 25 pieces of advice, and they weren't particularly sophisticated ideas, of course. Um, and I think it just really struck a chord in the creative community. And certainly we saw our initial explosion of popularity with the design specific, and then these sort of concentric rings just built out, and then it was illustrators and architects and writers, and just more and more generalized as time went on. But certainly initially it was mainly that core graphic design audience.
One of the things I love, and you spoke about it briefly there, is how your intent was never to make it into a business. It was kind of just a spontaneous idea that came about with you and Jason.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that sort of natural, spontaneous creation has helped GFDA grow over the years into present time today?
Well, at first, it was certainly doing it was easy because there wasn't, there was no expectation of an outcome. It was just like, oh, we're doing this, and there was no finances involved really. I mean, it was like $10 to buy the domain, but I mean, we were certainly poor graduate students, but we could spare $10. Um, so I think that there's real utility in not expecting what the outcome of something is going to be. But that's challenging when you get into entrepreneurship and business ownership and regular design practice in general, because you are trying to facilitate a particular outcome. And I think this is kind of like, when practiced properly, the value of doing some research and so forth, because then you sort of like put the bumpers on for like where you can go, but then you can still have that sort of exploration within those boundaries, and end up with a result.
I mean, I believe that one of the main pillars for any type of creativity, I think it's simply creating for the sake of creating.
Hmm.
Whether it's something like a podcast, or I've spoken to people who have started brands or do a lot of writing. It's kind of just for their own self exploration. And yes, like you were saying, you do have to get into the mindset also of getting to a point of, hey, am I trying to make this into a business? But I think it always falls back on that foundation of, I'm creating this because I want to see it in the world.
I think that there's I suppose I can add to that because we're talking about that intuition component earlier, and I think this is kind of a broad topic, but I think that a lot of there's a benefit and a detraction to the present day creative practice for specifically, we'll say graphic designers, but I mean I'm sure it's true for people in other different design disciplines, which is like you have this great ability to observe what literally billions of other people are doing at any moment. Like there's so many resources to see other people's work and to see great work. And, you're not cloistered to just like a monthly magazine like it was 20 plus years ago. And sort of like this limited drip of visual inspiration and so forth. And so that explosion has been, on one hand, really valuable, but on the other hand, it's also cheapened the industry and the practice because too many people will try to make something look like something else they've seen. And so it becomes a shallow imitation of something else. I suppose that gets into the whole AI thing as well, which, I don't completely understand. So I won't comment too much on that. But in terms of the individual person's practice, particularly, especially when you look at like student work, it's like there's a shallow imitation that's occurring, and that can be okay if it's early in somebody's career because you're trying to develop as a creative and you're trying to develop sensitivities, and mimicry can be valuable for that, not copying but mimicry. um, but if you stay that way, then you'll get 10, 20 years down the road and you won't have developed at all. On the flip side, though, I think that, and so there's a really important thing that happens with if you start to listen to that internal voice, but that internal voice has to simultaneously be shaped by good information over time. And so there's sort of two things that are happening. One is, are you feeding yourself good visual stuff to look at over time so that rather than starting a project and going and looking at other things, you can start a project. And I'm not saying don't do mood boards or anything like that, but like you could start a project and you could sort of look within to initiate your process and to refine and develop it. And so there'll be a general good skill set that's just present there because you've done the work over the course of however short or long your career is. But also simultaneously, you're doing something specific for a client. And so having like sort of filling your head with all of the right information and kind of like doing your initial background research so that when you so that you can combine that new information that is specific to the creative job you've got ahead of you, the task, with your developed set of taste and abilities, and sort of those two things internally can produce really amazing or unique and original creative work that perhaps to the untrained eye doesn't necessarily look different than everything else that's out there, but there really is something about it because it really has an impact. There's something that's you can't copy. There's something that's very authentic about it that has some longevity to it, I believe.
One of my favorite quotes from you is the relationship between risk and creativity. And the quote is, risk is the lifeblood of the creative process. Inherently, if you are doing something that is creative, innovative, or disruptive, you are taking a risk in some form, whether small or large. If you're not taking a risk, then whatever you're doing can't possibly be creative, innovative, or disruptive. If there's no risk involved, you have a strong idea of what the outcome is going to be. And if you have a strong idea of what the outcome is going to be, then that means that somebody else has already done it. What's a risk that you think is paid off and a risk that's backfired for GFDA?
Um, I don't think that any risk has totally backfired for GFDA because I kind of look look at it generally speaking like failures. And so failures are just information moving you forward to whatever your next success is going to be. And you're going to have lots and lots of failures because you need to constantly be like pinging yourself off of, the real world to get that feedback. And, like, I mean, we've certainly done things where we've lost a bunch of money and, had challenges and like any business that's trying to do something that's not standard. But as a risk that paid off, this is kind of a funny story, and we talked about it a little bit in our book, I think. But we, at one point, this has probably been 7 or 8 years ago, maybe more like 10 years actually. We did workshops. We started off doing lectures as part of GFDA. We got invited to speak somewhere fairly early on, like second year. And then, we hadn't really considered that was so much of an option. I think I had a feeling at one point that I would just like to tell the story to somebody after that first year. And lo and behold, that opportunity came up. And then we were kind of like, oh, people, we did fairly well at it. And so then we started offering that. And of course, primarily we had university schools, younger people inviting us out. And, that sort of progressed. And, as time went on, we learned, since the majority of places we were speaking were, as I said, universities, they don't really have money for speakers so much like that, especially with like design departments. They're typically small. But they do have money for like weekend workshops. And so I don't remember which school, but invited us out to do like a Thursday or Friday night lecture and said, do you guys do a workshop? We could pay you for that. We can't pay you for your lecture. It would be something that we would have to fit into a certain time period block on Saturday. And we were like, oh, we could do that. Like, yeah, we could do that. Like, at that point, we were teaching at our own university, as adjunct faculty, and we had proven ourselves enough that we were actually teaching the creative classes, the design classes, foundations, et cetera. So we're like, yeah, sure, we'll do that. And so we kind of built out this very basic workshop, and, we peddled around to the universities. Anytime somebody would ask if we could do a lecture, we'd try to get a little bit more scratch out of it from doing that. And we enjoyed it. But as time went on, we kind of started to feel like we've felt like imposters for a number of reasons throughout the entirety of the business. But in this particular instance, like we were working with students and we were having success, but we were teaching things that we weren't doing in practice day to day. Like, we would do some design and branding work, but that wasn't what GFDA was. GFDA was this retail company. It had this inspirational message, and we just felt this disconnect between our offering and what we were practicing, and it just felt a little bit disingenuous. And just like, I don't know, Jason and I have lots of conversations about it, and then we're like, okay, let's just stop doing the workshop, and then we got to figure out something that's specific and unique to us and to our experience, rather than kind of reinterpreting projects that we've done at our university or condensing it into a weekend exercise kind of thing. And so we spent some number of weeks kind of kicking around different ideas, none of which at this point I really remember, other than eventually we hit on this concept of the art of risk taking. And we were both kind of like simultaneously, similar to when we first started GFDA, like, yeah, that's what we do. That's like, from the name of the company to like, we've never, beforehand, we had never made products. We had never invested in anything in that way. It was always like, okay, we'll take this risk. Like, okay, after you've done that, we'll take the next risk, and then take the next risk, and on and on and on. And so we kind of saw that as like a cornerstone of like the thing that we were always doing, even though we weren't consciously aware of it. And so we're like, yeah, why don't we do a workshop that's somehow about taking risks in your work, in your creative experience or whatever. So we put that up on our website. I wrote like a paragraph about theoretically what the workshop would be about, like no plans for exercises or what it was going to be like, et cetera. And just we're like, okay, that's on there. Back to whatever it else is we've got pressing at the moment. It's there if somebody asks about it. Well, like literally a week later, somebody from Nike's corporate headquarters called us and was like, hey, I saw your poster at this shop in New York City and I loved it. and I didn't buy it then, but then I'm back home, and he was in Oregon. And he was like, I'm trying to plan this week long summit event for my team, and I was wasting time on the internet, and I remembered your poster. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go buy that poster. So I ended up on your website. I loved the poster, and I saw that you do this workshop. And I was like, yeah, okay. And he's like, so tell me about your workshop. And I was like, well, usually, we kind of like tailor it specific for our clients or our customers. So why don't you tell me what some of the things are that you're looking for? He's like, oh, okay. Well, we need X, Y, and Z. And, he kind of went into a bit of a diatribe about it. I was like, yeah, that's exactly what we do. So he was like, oh, that'd be great. Like, okay, let's do it. Send me your pricing and stuff like that, and everything. And I said, okay, well, tell me how many people it's going to be. Like, send me an email with how many people, and then we'll get your pricing over to you. And of course, we hadn't planned on pricing or we hadn't thought about any of that. So, had this phone call, and then I called up my then partner Jason, and I was like, you won't believe it. They actually want to do a workshop. Like, we have to figure out what we're going to charge for this. And so, that sort of kicked off the start of the workshop. But I mean, it was definitely one of those things like fake it till you make it. Like, I have no idea what this is supposed to look like or sound like or be like, but just say yes and then figure it out from there. It was our early motto, which was, ready, fire, aim. So that was very much in that vein.
And what year was that?
I want to say that was like 2015 or 16.
So another pivotal point in the GFDA journey that I want to talk about is fast forwarding a couple years past that. So October 2017 and getting deeper into the intuition, sort of what path you're going to take, part of the process. So in October 2017, your original partner, Jason Bacher, leaves, and you guys were in debt at the time, and you guys could have just split the debt, gone your own ways, and that would be the end of GFDA. But you had said, for me, there was still something left in GFDA and something I wanted to explore. And I'm curious to know, was there something specific that you had in mind, or was it just kind of in your gut and your heart of like, I'm not done with this yet?
A little bit of both, but definitely more like in my gut and in my heart. But in terms of like very practical matters, there were two things that I really wanted to pursue. One was a book, and previously in that interim between the start of the workshops and this point, we had been contacted by like 3 separate publishers, and each time they contacted us, which is unusual as far as my understanding goes, and said, hey, you should write a book. And we'd say, hey, great, what would you like us to write a book about? And they said, well, write a proposal and send it to us. Like, okay. So we would do that. We go through this whole, we had no guidance for that or whatever. We just sort of like, just stumble our way through it. And so we'd stumble our way through it, and we'd send them the proposal and they'd be like, hey, this is really great. This is what our board of directors would like you to do. Like, and then we would like revise the proposal and send it back, and they're like, this is great, but we don't think this is the time for it. What the fuck? Like, you asked me. Like, it was, if that had happened once, we figured like, oh, we just really blew it somehow. But it happened like 3 times in a row. So I guess, on one hand, we did actually really blow it 3 times in a row, but it was just like, we just didn't understand, like, why is a publishing company reaching out to us, asking us to do a proposal? And then, it was exactly the same every time. Like, tell us what you want to do. And then they'd come back and say, we want you to do this. And then after we would do that, they'd say, no, we don't want to do this project. Like, it didn't make any bit of sense. And through a connection, we ended up with an agent. And so we hadn't submitted a proposal, but we had kind of stumbled through early phases of a process with her. And at that, at least, like, it was clear some of the mistakes we were making in the proposal process with our previous attempts. But again, like, we just didn't have the right guidance for it. So that was kind of like in muddy, unfinished territory. We hadn't really pursued that with a lot of effort. It was just kind of like, we'd put a proposal together and send it to her, and she'd be like, oh yeah, this is great. Change this, change that, do this, think about that. And then we just wouldn't respond to her for 6 months. And then we get back like, hey, here's those like 30 minutes of changes you asked us to do in January. It's like August now. Like, and then we kind of repeat. So that was one thing, was the book. And then also, I think I was more excited about the workshop component than Jason was. And so I saw that as a viable path forward for the business. So I wanted to see what was possible with that. And I felt like at the very least I could pay off the debt with a couple workshops and kind of, see where things sat there. We'd had good success with Nike. We had done them twice, and it was like that was enough sort of professional clout to, go shop it around and try to sell it to other places. So those were kind of the two things that in my heart of hearts was like, I gotta at least give these two things a shot. And, so I guess kind of goes back to the beginning of our conversation. Same thing with when I started, or when I switched colleges and was like, I just got to try. And if it fails, then at the very least, I know I gave it the try and, it wasn't meant to be kind of thing. So, I ran with that.
Going back between the relationship between creativity and risk, and one of the things that you've said about GFDA is that there's really nothing else really like it on the market. So it's kind of a double-edged sword where you're being very creative and innovative, but it's also really hard because you can't look at other businesses to see what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody asks you what GFDA is, what do you explain it as?
I don't even know. It sort of depends. So we kind of have like a handful of major things that we do, and it depends on who we're talking to, what we're emphasizing, right? So on one hand, like we have the e-commerce store sort of lifestyle brand thing. So that's like obviously one component. The other is I'm trying to not use the word workshop anymore, even though I probably just used it 100 times in the last 5 minutes of our conversation. But our like retreat, our executive experience, our breakout, whatever you want to call it, that's kind of siloed into its own thing. We have our book, which is sort of related to the products, but it's a bit more of the narrative thing. And then we've got, which I think everybody knows us for in our large social media following, is the content we create. And that's written by my friend and colleague, Jason Richburg. And he's been involved with GFDA. Initially, he was just a friend of ours in graduate school and was kind of like contribute here and there and was around and helped us early on with like packaging and shipping, and then would contribute pieces of copy here and there. And at one point, kind of 2018-ish, he got fed up with teaching professionally, and I tricked him into moving back up north to Pittsburgh, where I was at that point, and helping me out with GFDA. And that sort of coincided with the contract for the book, and so he ended up becoming the primary author for the book. Initially, I was kind of like, he was a way better writer than I was, and so I would write out like the first narrative section, and then I would send it to him, and it was like the worst college professor markup with like red pen you'd ever seen. Like, this is wrong, this change this you could be more specific here. And after doing that for a couple weeks, it was like, hey, why don't you just fucking write it? Like, this is it's clearly you're so much better at this than I am. So he took over as primary like writing authorship role of the book. And then even though Jason Bacher had left the company at that point, we still collaborated on the book together. It was kind of like we parted on good terms, and we're still good friends to this day. But definitely, I think the catharsis of us going back through those previous 7 or 8 years and sort of codifying that and creating the narrative around it and reliving that, like, really helped to keep us from the potential of like falling apart into like resentment and all the things that normally happen when people separate from a business and a relationship that way. So Jason Bacher and I did the visuals, and I sort of handled the overall creative direction for the book, and then we would work collaboratively with Jason Richburg on the writing to kind of match the visuals to the writing and vice versa. So that was kind of a fun process.
So was there a gap between when Jason Bacher had left and before Jason Richburg had come on, where it was just you by yourself?
There was like a handful of months, but like where Jason Richburg fit in didn't really, like, he was just sort of like I wasn't like paying him on a regular basis. He wasn't like on salary or like in a partnership role or anything. It was kind of like hey, you're living with me. Can you help me with this thing? And it sort of naturally evolved into the working relationship we have today. And he'd done such a great job writing the book. Then what happened was the book was done, and we're like, okay, we've got 6 months until it's published. Like, let's try to grow our social accounts and try to promote this so we can get as good a book sales as we can. And of course, that should serve us for product sales and everything else. So I said, like, hey, why don't you start writing stuff for Instagram, sort of in a similar vein as what you did in the book? And so he did. And then like our content just took off at that point because, I didn't really understand how to utilize social media, Instagram in particular, up until that point. It was kind of like, do photos and show client work and show, like a piece of a GFDA advice. And somebody had said like, hey, I was seeking advice, and they're like, well, is there anything that you put out on your Instagram channel that like gets more engagement than others? And I was like, oh yeah, like once a week I put this piece of advice out, and I write like a sentence or two and post it, and it's like 10 times the engagement, which of course at the time wasn't a whole lot, but it was noticeable. And they were like, oh, well, you should just do that. And I was like, really? Like, I just feel like I should be doing something like pacing and different every day and something interesting. Like, nope, just do the same thing again and again and again, just vary within that theme. Like, okay, let's try that. And so, I mean, from August to December, I think that we went from like 20,000 to 80,000 followers. And, we were going to be happy if we could double to like 40 some thousand, but it just took off, and then it hasn't stopped. So, and then through that engagement, so then we started seeing the types of content within that written paragraph that Jason does so well, the certain themes that people really respond to and resonate with. And so then that sort of pushed his writing in a particular direction, which, I mean, he's already tends to be in that philosophical kind of like classical writing style approach anyways. But the thematic elements started to be guided by being responsive to our audience versus like, especially the first book and so forth, it's a little bit more creative focused. It's a little bit more hard work focused. And, now it's made that evolution away from that, or including that, but a lot broader in terms of what we talk about and promote.
So when was the initial shift from mainly design advice into more so the life motivational sort of general just working hard?
I'd say that the hardest shift for that happened after the launch of the book, but it had sort of, we were definitely very specifically designed for the first like 2 years of the brand. And then, because we did see that we were reaching a broader set of creatives, then we were like expanding the advice to more generally creatives. And then, from there it was like, well, it's not just creatives, it's kind of people that have this entrepreneurial mindset. So there was kind of like this slow bleed outward from designer to creative to like sort of entrepreneur. And that at that point was kind of where we got the book. And that also was like the, do the fucking work. That was kind of in that more entrepreneur specific phase, I would say. And then that broader philosophical content after, for better or worse, we're happy with the first book, but like, we're so different from that now. And, whenever we get around to a follow-up book, it'll be much more in line with the existing content that we have. But it was kind of like, it went from that. It still includes that sort of entrepreneurial mindset, but it's so hard to pin down. It's like that independent sort of like strong work ethic. It's like, we have a lot of athletes that follow us, and like professional and fitness influencers and stuff like that. And, it's kind of an interesting mix, like looking at what sort of the unifying thread is now. It's people that work really hard on themselves towards a particular goal. And that's, you're a biker, you're a yoga person, you're a designer, you're an artist, you're a writer, it's like, it doesn't matter what the specific application of that is. It's more of that, that mindset is kind of where we've found ourselves.
I think that's perfectly said, because I was going to say I don't think you necessarily need to be some type of creator or artist to resonate with the work. think it's perfectly how you said. It's anybody who's putting some type of work into themselves, whether it is creative or athletic. I'm curious to know, are there any certain people or brands, whether it's with your workshops or types of writing, that you would want to collaborate with in the future?
Oh, we'd love to work with any number of brands. I can't say that I've got anything specific off the top of my head, but um, we our workshops have been super effective. Our executive retreats are trying to not use that word. Have been super effective. We worked with Nike, we worked with Adobe, we worked with New Balance, we worked with Church and Dwight, as well as a bunch of like smaller family-owned businesses, studios, agencies, etc. I think that before, we did the workshops pretty strongly before COVID, and then that killed that business, unfortunately. And so it's something that we're building back up again. And I think that now with the evolution of our business, one of our challenges is, we were kind of getting to this point right before COVID hit and right as the book was launching. But like when we go in and we work with departments, it's people think of us, or they thought of us primarily as like in the creative departments and marketing. But what we do and what we found was communicating that ethos across the broader range of departments at a company is really valuable, because it gets everybody on the same page. And I kind of picked that up from our first go around at Nike, because second go around at Nike, we did two separate experiences with them. And the second one had a lot broader, it wasn't just one team, it was multiple teams. And when I was talking with somebody there about it who was helping to organize it, they were saying how the goal for them was, even though people in like accounting aren't pushing the envelope in terms of innovative thinking or whatever, it's important that the whole company is on board with that as their ethos, because that shared culture is very important. And they see how that trickles down into all the different departments and individual staff members. And so that was kind of like, oh yeah, that is important. Like it seems so obvious once you say it, but if you've not thought about it before, it's easy to kind of like, not have that be top of mind. And so often when we're pitching to new people to do the art of risk taking, we're trying to help them realize that like it would be better if we don't just come in and work with 15, 20, 40 people in your creative department. It'd be great if we had creative and sales and marketing, and we get all these people together, partly because what we do is culture related, but also you can't develop a good culture if you don't have a good rapport with the people you work with day in and day out. And there's often conflict between departments. It's like, sales can't understand why the creatives want to do this off the wall thing. And, they have to come to a mutual understanding where like the salespeople understand like the way that your business stays viable is because you come up with new things. And the creative people have to understand that it's important to come up with new things. Otherwise you stagnate and die. But also you have to have like those new things have to produce a profit, because otherwise you don't have money and then you don't get paid and then the company falls apart. So there's this delicate balance of opposites that has to happen. And it gets really easy, especially in like today's world, to because everybody works remotely and they're at home and they don't interact with anybody. It's like less and less to not be thinking about the whole picture, to just like really get siloed into like your perspective of things and how the business is run and like the value that you bring, and not see all of the other components that are working together to like make this, behemoth machine move, whether you're a 10-person company or a 2-person company or a 5,000 person company. It's like, that's still a universally true thing.
Was it ever challenging for you in GFDA balancing with your own identity of I'm a creative versus I'm a business owner?
It's been difficult. What I've found as kind of the balance of that is in a responsible way, taking the creative entrepreneurial penchant that I have and putting that into all different areas. So like, when I was younger, it's like, I want to do graphic design. I want to make logos and websites and brands and books and, experiment with colors, pattern, blah, 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 blah. But now it's like, I do that. I still do like the client facing part of work, of course, but it's like, well, how do I design this experience? Like when we're thinking about a workshop, like what's it like when somebody comes in and like sits down at the table? Like, what things are there? How are the folders set up? How do we pace things going from like one part of the event to the next? What's it like when I engage with somebody via email or request sponsorship? But like, I'm thinking about like, how do I create all of the things that the business touches? And that allows me to sort of fulfill that itch that otherwise was just solely like, oh, this is a really sweet color of yellow next to this blue. Like, I hope the client will go for this.
Going back to a previous point that you said when I asked you, what do you think GFDA is, and your gut reaction was just, I don't know. And honestly, I kind of love that because you're being honest, but it also just feels like you truly are building and creating your own path for who knows, you might be inspiring, a person a couple generations from now, or, a kid from now who sees GFDA's work and is like, okay, I'm going to follow in that person's footsteps. And one of my favorite quotes from you is, and it was a piece of advice that you had given on another podcast. You said, experience is the thing you get the moment after you need it. And I think that's so true. How do you think people can break through that internal resistance of just thinking about something they want to do and actually getting into the arena and start creating?
Oh man, you just have to do it. Like it's so hard, and it's so hard for everybody. And it's still hard for me. Like I will constantly find myself like hemming and hawing about something, and the solution is to not sit there and to like agonize over it. Is to like put pen to paper or whatever the equivalent is. Like even like this past week, I've been working with an agency, sort of filling in some gaps for them, doing some brand type stuff, and like kicking the rust off of some of the skill sets that I haven't used lately in my design practice. And, find myself sitting there with like the blank sheet of paper and the blank Illustrator thing. And then it's like, well, maybe this and maybe that. It's like, no, Brian, just fucking start like putting stuff down, and then like the solution will reveal itself. But you have to like put in the work. You have to start doing the thing. And then, then the muse appears. But otherwise, like you can just stay in your head the whole time and it doesn't do any good.
Something that I always tell myself is that it's always easier to improve on something than it is to start, but it's impossible to improve if you don't start.
Yeah, 100%.
Brian, where can everyone go to support you and find you and all your work with GFDA?
Yeah, you can primarily find us at our Instagram account, which is at gfda.co. You can also visit us on our website, www.gfda.co. We have a podcast that we are going to be launching here very soon. It's going to be hopefully mid to late June. We've got about 30 episodes recorded already. We're going to do an initial drop of 4 or 5 episodes, and then be releasing weekly from there. And we're basically just we're interviewing people who are interesting to us, followers of ours, that are kind of people that create themselves in different ways, and kind of like picking up from where our static content leaves off. So hopefully that'll be a huge hit. It's been fun to be involved in that. That's actually I'm partly involved in that, but that's more specifically Jason, the writer. He's been so if you guys check out the podcast, you'll mostly see him, and then occasionally see me. Yeah, those are kind of the primary things. Of course, you can get our book, Do the Fucking Work: Lowbrow Advice for High Level Creativity. You can buy it on our website. It comes signed. You can also find it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, any of the regular bookstores available nationally.
Sounds good. Brian, I appreciate you for coming on the Outworker.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Great chatting with you.